The sun hung like a hammer over the high plains, beating down heat that made the horizon shimmer and dance.
Look what I found!
105 degrees
Let's
by
go.
Thatcher Crane's
All right,
reckoning,
stick together.
though he'd stopped checking his pocket watch
Easy
2
now,
hours
drink
back.
it all.
Time didn't matter much when you
Is
were
she
riding
okay?
fence line in
She'll be
country
fine.
that could kill a
Easy
man
now.
for being
I'm just
careless.
passing through. Not
Thatch
without a
had
good
learned
reason. State your
not
business.
to be careless.
I'm here for the judge.
Years of solitude
It's
had
time
taught
for
him
you to
that
go.
much. His
We'll miss you,
buckskin
Grandmother.
gelding picked
We'll be
its
back
way
soon.
along the ridge hooves, crunching on soil baked hard as pottery. Sweat darkened the horse's flanks. Salt crusted on Thatch's shirt collar. His canteen was half empty, which meant he had maybe another hour before he'd need to head back to the ranch. The fence could wait until evening, when the worst of the heat broke. He was thinking about cold water from the well when he heard it. A scream, not an animal, human. High-pitched and terrified, cutting through the thick air like a blade through butter. Child's voice. Thatch's hand went to the rifle in his saddle boot before his mind caught up with his instincts. He'd been a soldier once before the ranch, before Abigail. Some habits died hard. Some never died at all. He spurred the gelding hard. The horse responded, muscles bunching as it climbed the rise, dust plumes behind them. Thatch's hat brim snapped in the wind of their passage. His chest tightened with something he couldn't name, hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose, maybe, or fear. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. At the crest of the ridge he hauled back on the reins. The scene below him froze his blood despite the killing heat. A covered wagon sat tilted at an angle where the ground sloped into a shallow ravine. One wheel was half buried, the axle clearly broken. Supplies scattered across the dusty earth like offerings to an uncaring god. A trunk with its lid torn open, clothing trampled into the dirt. A water barrel on its side with dark stains spreading beneath it. But it wasn't the wagon that stopped Thatch's heart. It was the two figures 50 yards beyond it. A woman lay motionless on the ground, her dark hair matted with sweat, and something darker. Her dress was torn at the shoulder, revealing crude bandages made from strips of cloth. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular breaths, barely breathing, barely alive. Standing over her was a child, a girl no more than 6 years old by Thatch's estimate. Blonde hair hung in tangled knots around a face smudged with dirt and tears. Her calico dress, once perhaps light blue, was now brown with dust and marked with rusty streaks that Thatch recognized immediately as dried blood. The girl stood with her feet planted wide, holding a broken cottonwood branch above the woman's face, shading her from the merciless sun. How long had she been standing there? Hours, days. Thatch didn't waste time wondering. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped, boots hitting the ground with purpose. The girl's head snapped toward him. Terror flashed across her small face, the kind of terror that came from experience, not imagination. She didn't run. Instead, she widened her stance and raised the branch like a weapon, her thin arms trembling with effort. "Stay back!" her voice cracked. "Don't you touch her." Thatch raised his hands, slowly, palms out. Kept his movements deliberate, unthreatening. He'd gentled enough spooked horses to know how fear worked, how it made creatures human or otherwise unpredictable. "Easy now," he said, his voice low and steady. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." That's what they said. The girl's blue eyes were red-rimmed but fierce. The men who came, they said they just wanted water. Thatch's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough in his 38 years to know what that meant. What wanting water could turn into when bad men found women and children alone on the trail. "How long ago?" he asked, keeping his hands visible. 2 days, maybe 3. The girl swayed slightly, and Thatch realized she was fighting to stay upright. Fighting exhaustion and dehydration and trauma all at once. "I can't remember. It's so hot." "Where's your father?" The branch dipped. The girl's lower lip trembled. "Dead." The word came out flat, affectless, the way soldiers spoke when they'd seen too much too fast. They shot him when he tried to stop them. No child should sound like that. Empty, hollowed out. Thatch took a careful step forward, his boots making soft sounds in the dust. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Pearl." She licked cracked lips. "Pearl May Fletcher." "Pearl." He nodded, taking another slow step. "I'm Thatcher Crane. Most folks call me Thatch. I've got a ranch about 5 miles west of here." He gestured toward the woman on the ground without looking away from Pearl's eyes. "Your mama needs help, real help. The kind I can give her, but only if you let me." Pearl studied him with an intensity that seemed far too old for her age. Thatch could see her weighing his words, searching his face for lies, looking for the trap she'd learned to expect from men who made promises. Smart girl, too smart for 6. Finally, the branch lowered. "She won't wake up," Pearl whispered. "I tried. I keep trying." Thatch closed the distance between them and knelt beside the woman. The heat radiating from her skin told him what he needed to know even before he checked her pulse, weak and rapid beneath his fingers, thready. The kind of pulse that said time was running out. Infection, dehydration, possibly internal injuries from whatever had happened when those men came. Out here, any one of those could kill. All 3 together. He looked up at Pearl, who was watching him with desperate hope, warring with the expectation of disappointment. How long has she been like this? Since yesterday morning. She was talking before that, told me to stay with her, told me not to leave her. Fresh tears cut tracks through the dirt on Pearl's cheeks. "I didn't leave her. I stayed." "You did good," Thatch said, and meant it. "You kept her shaded. That might have saved her life." Might being the operative word, but he didn't say that part out loud. He stood and moved to his horse, pulling his canteen free. When he returned, he carefully lifted the woman's head, lighter than he expected, nothing but skin and bone, and wet her lips. Most of the water ran down her chin, but some made it into her mouth. She didn't respond. Didn't even swallow reflexively. That wasn't good. "We need to move her," Thatch said, making his decision. "Get her somewhere cool, somewhere I can treat her proper." "Where?" Pearl asked, her voice small. "My ranch. It's not fancy, but it's got walls and a roof and a well with cold water." He glanced at the scattered supplies around the broken wagon. "Can you gather what's salvageable, food, blankets, anything that might be useful?" Pearl nodded and immediately set to work, moving with the mechanical efficiency of someone holding themselves together through sheer will. Thatch watched her for a moment, this child who'd seen her father murdered and her mother wounded, who'd stood in the August heat for days, keeping death at bay with a broken tree branch. Strongest person he'd met in a long time. He turned his attention to the more pressing problem. The woman, Pearl's mother, was slight, but dead weight was always heavier than it looked. He managed to get her across his saddle, securing her as best he could with rope from his saddlebag. Not comfortable, but comfort wasn't the priority right now. Survival was. Pearl appeared at his elbow with a canvas bag stuffed with items: cornmeal, dried beans, a few potatoes that hadn't rotted, a wool blanket. "Can you ride?" Thatch asked. "Papa was teaching me." Her voice caught on the word Papa. "Good enough." He lifted her onto the gelding behind the saddle where she could sit without putting weight on her mother. "Hold on to my belt. Don't let go for anything." Small hands gripped his belt so tightly he could feel her knuckles digging into his back through his shirt. The ride back to the ranch was the longest 5 miles of Thatch's life. The sun climbed higher, turning the air into something that shimmered and burned. The woman's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute. Pearl's hands never loosened their grip on his belt, but he could feel her slumping against his back as exhaustion took hold. He'd found them just in time. Maybe. When the ranch house finally came into view, a low structure of weathered wood with a barn and corral behind it, Thatch felt something loosen in his chest. They'd made it this far. That had to count for something. He carried Pearl's mother inside the girl, following so close she was practically stepping on his heels. The interior of the house was dim and blessedly cooler than outside, though not by much. Thick adobe walls helped, but there was only so much they could do against Wyoming summer heat. Thatch laid the woman on his bed, the bed where Abigail had died all those years ago, the bed he hadn't been able to sleep in since, the bed that had sat empty while he made do with a bedroll in the barn loft. He'd opened this door maybe 3 times since the fever took his family. Each time felt like dying all over again. But Pearl's mother was dying for real right now, and his ghosts would have to wait. Pearl stood frozen in the doorway watching as Thatch stripped away the makeshift bandages on her mother's shoulder. The wound beneath was angry and red radiating heat, infection just as he'd suspected. The skin around the cut was swollen, inflamed. If he didn't act fast, the infection would spread. Sepsis, death. "Pearl," he said without looking up, "I need you to help me. Can you do that? What do you need?" Her voice was steadier than he'd expected. "There's a well outside. I need cold water as much as you can carry." He pointed to a row of wooden buckets near the door. "Fill those. Bring them here." The girl moved immediately, grateful, perhaps, to have a task. To have something she could control in a world that had spun completely out of her control. Thatch worked methodically while she was gone. He had a bottle of whiskey in the cupboard barely touched because drinking alone led to dark places, and he used half of it cleaning the wound. The woman's unconscious body jerked at the sting, which was actually encouraging. Meant she could still feel pain. Meant she was still fighting. He packed the wound with a poultice of yarrow and comfrey that he kept for his horses. Worked on people just as well, though he'd never admit where he'd learned that. Some knowledge came from places you didn't talk about, from war, from watching men die badly and trying to keep others from following. By the time Pearl returned with the first bucket, he was wrapping fresh bandages. The girl's arms shook with the weight of the water, but she'd filled it nearly to the brim, determined, stubborn. "Good," he said. "Set it there. Now go get another." They worked in tandem as the afternoon bled into evening. Thatch sponged the woman's burning skin with cold water, trying to bring her fever down. Pearl fetched and carried her face set in grim determination that reminded him of soldiers he'd known. Too young to be soldiers, too young to see what they'd seen, but doing the work anyway, because someone had to. As the sun finally began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, through the window the woman's fever broke. The tension drained from Thatch's shoulders when he felt her skin cool beneath his hand. Not out of danger, not by a long shot, but she'd cleared the first hurdle. Pearl sat slumped against the wall, her eyes half closed. Thatch realized the child hadn't eaten or had water herself in hours, maybe longer. "When did you last eat?" he asked. Pearl blinked slowly like she was trying to remember. "I don't know." Thatch moved to the kitchen, little more than a corner of the main room with a cast-iron stove and rough-hewn shelves. He built up the fire and set coffee to boil, then pulled out the remains of yesterday's cornbread and some dried venison. Simple food, but it was what he had. He brought it to Pearl on a tin plate. "Eat." She took the plate but didn't move to touch the food. Just stared at it like she'd forgotten what eating was for. Is Mama going to die? The question hung in the air between them, heavy, honest, deserving of an honest answer. Thatch could have lied, could have offered easy comfort, the kind of platitudes people gave children to shield them from hard truths. But something about the way Pearl looked at him, with those 2 old eyes in that small face, told him she deserved better than lies. "I don't know," he said. "She's fighting. That's all we can ask for right now." Pearl nodded slowly, then picked up a piece of cornbread. She ate mechanically, chewing and swallowing, without seeming to taste anything. Fuel, not food. Thatch poured himself coffee and sat in the chair by the bed, watching the woman's chest rise and fall. The rhythm was steadier now, more regular, a good sign. "Why did you help us?" Pearl asked suddenly. Thatch turned to look at her. "What kind of question is that? Mama said most people don't help unless there's something in it for them." Pearl's voice was matter of fact. "What's in it for you?" "Nothing." "Then why?" Thatch took a sip of coffee, bitter and black. How did you explain to a 6-year-old that sometimes people helped because it was the right thing to do? How did you explain that to yourself when you'd spent so long not caring about anything or anyone? Sometimes people help because it's the right thing to do, he said finally. Papa used to say that. Pearl's lower lip trembled. He said there was still good people in the world, even when Mama said there wasn't. Your Mama had reason to be cautious. Pearl set down the plate, most of the food untouched. She didn't want to come west. Papa said there was opportunity out here, land, a future. Her voice dropped to a whisper. There's no future anymore. Thatch wanted to tell her she was wrong, that there was always a future, that things would get better. But the words stuck in his throat, tasting too much like lies. Instead, he said, "Get some rest. You can sleep in the loft. There's blankets up there. I want to stay with Mama. She needs quiet and you need sleep." Pearl's jaw set in a stubborn line that reminded Thatch of his sister dead, these 20 years in a fever outbreak back in Missouri. Same determination, same refusal to bend. "I'm not leaving her," Pearl said. Thatch recognized when a battle wasn't worth fighting. "Fine, but you sleep." Pearl curled up on the floor beside the bed, using her canvas bag as a pillow. Within minutes, her breathing evened out into the deep rhythm of exhausted sleep. Children could do that, drop into unconsciousness like falling off a cliff. Adults had lost that gift somewhere along the way. Thatch sat in the gathering darkness, listening to the night sounds filtering through the windows. Crickets, the distant call of an owl, the whisper of wind through dry grass. Sounds he'd grown so accustomed to that he barely heard them anymore. But tonight, they sounded different, less lonely somehow. The woman, Pearl's mother, stirred occasionally, mumbling words he couldn't make out. Each time he checked her fever, gave her water, adjusted the bandages. Doctoring was something he'd learned the hard way through necessity rather than training. When you lived this far from town, you learned to handle emergencies yourself, or you buried the consequences. Somewhere around midnight, the woman's eyes opened. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, confusion clouding her features. Then her head turned, taking in the unfamiliar room. When her gaze found Pearl sleeping on the floor, something in her expression crumpled. "Pearl," she gasped, trying to sit up. "Easy now." Thatch moved into her line of sight, keeping his voice low so he wouldn't wake Pearl. "She's here. She's safe. You're both safe." The woman's gaze found him. Fear flashed across her face, the same fear he'd seen in Pearl earlier, the kind that came from experience. "Who?" Her voice cracked. "Where?" "My ranch. I found you on the plains. You've been unconscious for about 12 hours. She tried again to rise, and this time Thatch helped her, propping her up with pillows. Her face was pale except for 2 fever-bright spots on her cheeks, and she moved with the careful stiffness of someone in serious pain. "The men," she said. "Are they gone?" "Long gone from what Pearl told me." The woman closed her eyes. Relief. Then something darker crossed her face. "Daniel," she whispered. "My husband. They killed him. I'm sorry. They wanted money." Her voice was hollow, scraped raw. "We didn't have any. Daniel tried to fight them. They shot him. Then they went through our things. When they didn't find what they wanted, they—" She touched her injured shoulder gingerly, unable to finish the sentence. Rage settled in Thatch's gut, cold and sharp. He'd seen enough evil in his life to know it came in many forms, but there was something particularly vicious about men who would murder a father and wound a mother while a child watched. "How many?" he asked. 3, maybe 4. "I was trying to shield Pearl. I couldn't—" Her breath hitched. "I couldn't stop them from taking everything." "You stopped them from taking what mattered," Thatch said. "Your daughter is alive. You're alive because of you." The woman looked at him properly for the first time, really looked, taking in his weathered face, his work-roughened hands, the gray threading through his dark hair. "Why did you help us?" she asked. Same question Pearl had asked. "You don't know us." "It was the right thing to do." The woman studied his face in the lamplight. Looking for the angle, probably. The ulterior motive. People didn't just help strangers out here without expecting something in return. That's what experience had taught her about human nature. Everyone was looking out for themselves, except, apparently, him today. "Thank you," she said finally, voice breaking. I can't." Tears spilled over. "Thank you." Thatch stood uncomfortable with gratitude. Uncomfortable with emotion in general. Years of keeping everything locked down tight made moments like this feel foreign, dangerous. "You need rest," he said, "and food when you're able. We'll talk more in the morning." He moved toward the door, intending to sleep in the barn like he had since Abigail died, but the woman's voice stopped him. "Mr. Crane?" He paused, hand on the door frame. "Thatch." "Thatch," she hesitated. "The men who did this. If they come back—" "They won't," Thatch said with certainty. Men like that were cowards at heart. They preyed on the weak and defenseless. They didn't come back to ranches where armed men waited. "And if they're fool enough to try," he added, his voice going cold and flat, "they'll regret it." He stepped out into the night, letting the door close softly behind him. The air had cooled considerably. Blessed relief after the day's heat. Stars filled the sky from horizon to horizon, vast and indifferent. The same stars that had watched him bury Abigail and little Clara. The same stars that would keep watching long after he was dust. Thatch stood on the porch for a long moment, listening to the silence. In all his years alone on this ranch, he'd convinced himself he preferred solitude. It was simpler, safer. People complicated things, brought trouble and pain and expectations he'd never learned how to meet. But tonight, standing under the endless Wyoming sky, with two strangers sleeping in his house, Thatch felt something shift inside him. Something he couldn't quite name, but recognized as dangerous nonetheless. He'd saved their lives today. That was supposed to be the end of it. Somehow, though, he suspected it was only the beginning. The next 3 days passed in a rhythm of careful nursing and cautious recovery. The woman's fever returned twice more, each time less severe than before. Thatch treated it with the same methodical attention he gave to everything else: cool compresses, willow bark tea for the pain, clean bandages changed twice daily. Pearl rarely left her mother's side, though Thatch caught her watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, measuring him, still deciding if he could be trusted. Smart girl. On the 4th morning, the woman was strong enough to sit at the table for breakfast. Thatch had made johnny cakes and fried salt pork, simple fare, but the woman ate like it was a feast. "You're a good cook," she said, surprising him. "It's edible. That's about all I aim for." "That's more than I managed on the trail." A tentative smile crossed her face. "Everything I made tasted like smoke and desperation." Pearl giggled the first time Thatch had heard the sound, and the woman's face softened. She reached over to smooth her daughter's tangled hair, a gesture so tender it made Thatch look away. After breakfast, the woman insisted on helping with dishes, despite Thatch's protests. They worked in companionable silence, and Thatch found himself acutely aware of her presence in his space. The rustle of her skirt, the faint scent of the lavender soap he'd given her to wash with, the careful way she moved to favor her injured shoulder. "I've been thinking," she said as she dried the last plate. "We need to move on. Find a town. Get word to Daniel's family back east." Thatch's hand stilled in the wash basin. "You're in no condition to travel." "I can't impose on you forever." "You're not imposing." She set down the plate and turned to face him. "You've been more than kind, more than generous. But Pearl and I, we need to figure out what comes next. Where we go from here." "Where will you go?" The question hung between them. The woman's jaw tightened, and Thatch saw her swallow hard. "Back east, perhaps. Daniel had a brother in Ohio. You got money for passage." The silence that followed was answer enough. "The men took everything," she said finally. "Every cent we had. The land deed Daniel was carrying, all of it." "Then you can't leave," Thatch said bluntly. "Not until you've got the means to. I can work. You can heal." Thatch interrupted, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "You can let that shoulder mend proper. You can let your daughter stop looking over her shoulder every 5 minutes, expecting those men to come back. He forced himself to soften his tone. You can stay here until you're ready. Both of you. The woman searched his face. Why are you doing this? Thatch thought about the question. About waking up this morning and hearing Pearl's laughter from the loft. About watching the woman move through his kitchen like she was starting to belong there. About the way his house felt less like a tomb and more like a home. I chose to live alone after my family died, he said finally. Chose the quiet. But choosing solitude is different from standing by when people need help. I might prefer keeping to myself, but I'm not heartless. I never thought you were. Her lips curved in a small smile. You're a stubborn man, Thatch Crane. So I've been told. Pearl appeared in the doorway, holding a book she'd found on one of Thatch's shelves, a worn copy of McGuffey's Reader that had belonged to his sister. Mama, Pearl said, can Mr. Thatch teach me to read this? The woman's expression shifted to something complicated. Pearl, that's not— I'll teach her, Thatch said, before he could think better of it. Both the woman and Pearl turned to stare at him. You will. Pearl's eyes went wide. If your mama doesn't mind. Thatch shrugged, feeling unaccountably self-conscious. I've got the time. Books just sit there gathering dust if nobody reads them. Pearl looked at her mother with such hope that the woman's resistance visibly crumbled. If Mr. Thatch is willing, then yes, but you have to promise to mind him and not be a bother. I promise, Pearl clutched the book to her chest. By the way, the woman said, turning to Thatch, I realize I never told you my name. He'd been wondering about that, actually. Seemed strange to have someone living in your house without knowing what to call them. Rosalind, she said. Rosalind Adelaide Fletcher, though most people call me Rosa. Rosa. He tested the name. It fit her somehow, strong but soft at the edges. That evening after supper, Thatch kept his promise. He sat with Pearl at the rough wooden table, lamplight pooling around them, and opened the McGuffey's Reader. Pearl traced the letters with her finger, sounding out words with intense concentration. Thatch corrected her gently when she stumbled, praised her when she got it right. Rosa sat in the rocking chair by the cold fireplace, mending one of Pearl's dresses, but Thatch could feel her attention on them, watching, listening. It felt strange having people in his space again, strange and unsettling, and something else he couldn't quite name, not entirely unpleasant. They worked for an hour before Pearl's yawns became too frequent to ignore. Rosa tucked her daughter into the bed, Thatch's bed, where he still couldn't bring himself to sleep. And Thatch heard them talking in low voices. Prayers, he realized, though he couldn't make out the words. When Rosa came back down, she found him standing at the window, looking out at the darkness. She's asleep, Rosa said. Finally. She's bright, learns quick. Daniel wanted her to have an education, said it was important, especially for a girl. Rosa came to stand beside him, leaving careful distance between them. He had all these plans. A house with a real floor, land of our own. Maybe a store one day. Sounds like he was a good man. He was. Rosa's reflection in the glass showed her wiping her eyes. He deserved better than dying on the side of a road in the middle of nowhere. Nobody deserves that. They stood in silence for a while, the night pressing in around the small circle of lamplight. Thatch, Rosa said eventually, what you're doing for us, letting us stay teaching Pearl all of it, I know it's not nothing. I know it disrupts your life. Life needs disrupting sometimes. Even so. She turned to face him fully. I want you to know it matters. You matter, to both of us. Thatch felt something tighten in his chest, an uncomfortable pressure that made him want to step back, put distance between himself and whatever this feeling was. You should rest, he said instead. Your shoulder, my shoulder is healing fine, thanks to you. Rosa didn't move. I'm serious, Thatch. Whatever happens next, wherever Pearl and I end up, I'll never forget what you've done. Nothing to forget, Thatch said gruffly. Now get some sleep before that daughter of yours is up with the sun demanding more lessons. Rosa smiled a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes and softened the hard edges that grief had carved into her face. Good night, Thatch. Night. He waited until she'd climbed the ladder to the loft. He'd given up his bed to her and Pearl, taking the loft for himself, before he extinguished the lamp and stepped out onto the porch. The stars were out again, brilliant and cold. A slight breeze had picked up, carrying the scent of sage and dry grass. Thatch sat in the chair he'd built years ago, weathered now and comfortable with age, and let his mind wander. He thought about Rosa and Pearl, about the way the house felt different with them in it. Fuller somehow, though they took up hardly any space. He thought about Pearl's laughter and Rosa's smile and the strange, unsettling warmth in his chest when he heard them. Dangerous, that feeling, because people left, through death or distance or simple change of heart. Thatch had learned that lesson well enough. The smart thing would be to keep his distance, help them get back on their feet, send them on their way before he got too used to having them around. But when had Thatcher Crane ever done the smart thing when it came to lost causes? He sat there until the moon rose full and bright, turning the plains silver. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. His horses shifted restlessly in the corral. Inside the house, 2 people were sleeping under his roof, safe and sheltered. For tonight, that would be enough. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. He'd deal with it then, just like he'd dealt with everything else since Abigail and Clara died. One day at a time, one breath at a time, one choice at a time. And today he'd chosen to save 2 lives. Everything else would follow from that choice, for better or worse. Thatch just hoped he was ready for whatever came next. The following week settled into an unexpected rhythm. Rosa grew stronger each day, her shoulder healing cleanly under Thatch's careful attention. Pearl seemed to bloom in the safety of the ranch, her laughter becoming a regular sound that filled the empty spaces Thatch had grown accustomed to. Every morning Thatch taught Pearl to read. Every afternoon she helped with small chores, feeding the chickens, gathering eggs, learning to card wool. Every evening the 3 of them ate dinner together at the rough wooden table, and Thatch found himself talking more than he had in years. It should have felt temporary, should have felt like an interlude before real life resumed. Instead, it felt like home. Thatch tried not to think too hard about that, about what it meant, about what would happen when Rosa was fully healed and needed to move on, about the empty house that would be waiting when they left. He especially tried not to think about the way his chest tightened when Rosa smiled, or the way Pearl had started calling him Mr. Thatch instead of Mr. Crane, or the way he'd caught himself planning improvements to the house, a proper bedroom for Pearl maybe, or a bigger kitchen where Rosa could work more comfortably. Dangerous thoughts, foolish thoughts, but thoughts he couldn't quite silence. 3 weeks after he'd found them on the plains, Miriam Webb came to visit. She was their nearest neighbor, a widow in her 60s, who lived 5 miles east with her son Harold and his family. Thatch hadn't seen her in months. He didn't encourage visitors, but she showed up one afternoon with a basket of preserves and an expression of undisguised curiosity. "Thatcher Crane," she said, taking in the scene of Pearl playing with barn cats while Rosa hung laundry to dry. "You've been holding out on me." "Afternoon, Miriam. Don't afternoon me. Who are these people and why haven't I heard about them?" Thatch gave her the short version, found them on the plains, attacked by bandits, recovering here. Miriam listened with shrewd eyes that missed nothing. "And they're staying?" she asked. "For now." Miriam studied Rosa, who was watching them warily from the clothesline. "She your housekeeper?" "Something like that." "And the child?" "Her daughter." "I see." Miriam's tone suggested she saw quite a bit more than Thatch was saying. "Well, bring them over here. I want to meet them properly." Thatch made introductions. Miriam was kind to Rosa and charmed by Pearl, but Thatch could feel the older woman's assessment going on beneath the pleasant conversation. When she finally left, she pulled Thatch aside. "That woman's in trouble," Miriam said bluntly, "running from something. You can see it in her eyes." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Definitely." Miriam poked him in the chest. "And you're getting attached. Don't deny it. I've known you 20 years, Thatcher. I know what you look like when you care about something. I'm helping people who need help. You're doing more than that, and we both know it." Her expression softened. "I'm not saying it's wrong. Lord knows you've been half dead since Abigail and Clara passed. It's good to see you living again. Just be careful. People with secrets bring complications." After she left, Thatch found Rosa on the porch watching Pearl chase butterflies in the yard. "She knows I'm hiding something," Rosa said, without preamble. "Miriam's perceptive. Will she tell people about us being here?" Thatch considered the question. "She might tell her family, but Miriam's not a gossip, and she's not mean-spirited. If she thought you were in danger, she'd keep your secret." Rosa nodded, but her shoulders stayed tense. "You want to tell me what you're running from?" Thatch asked. "The whole story, I mean." For a long moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she sighed. "My maiden name wasn't Fletcher. It was Hartford. Rosalind Adelaide Hartford." The name meant nothing to Thatch, but the way Rosa said it, like it tasted bitter, told him it should. "Hartford Shipping," she continued. "My family owns one of the largest shipping companies on the East Coast. We were wealthy, very wealthy." Thatch waited, sensing there was more. "When I was 22, I met Daniel Fletcher. He was a poet, a dreamer, a man with no prospects and no fortune. My mother forbade me from seeing him. When I refused to obey, she disowned me, cut me off completely. I married Daniel anyway, and we tried to make a life together." Rosa's hands twisted in her lap. "Daniel wanted to go west, start over somewhere we could build something of our own. So we sold everything we had, bought a wagon, and headed for Oregon. And then," her voice broke, "you know what happened then? Does your family know you're alive?" "I don't know. Maybe. Daniel's death would have been reported somewhere, I suppose, but I've used his name since we married. I haven't been Rosalind Hartford in 7 years." "Why tell me now?" Rosa met his eyes. "Because if my mother finds out I'm alive, she'll come for me. Or more accurately, she'll come for Pearl. My father died 6 months ago, and he left everything to his only grandchild, $250,000. Thatch felt like he'd been punched. "What? Pearl is an heiress, and my mother will do anything to get control of that money, including taking my daughter away from me." The morning brought with it a rider. Thatch was in the barn mucking out stalls while Pearl fed the chickens when he heard the sound of hooves on hard-packed earth. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle propped against the wall, but he forced himself to relax when he saw it was just one man. Well-dressed, riding a fine sorrel gelding that looked too clean for trail work. The stranger dismounted near the porch, dusting off his black suit jacket with careful precision. He was perhaps 50 years old, with silver threading through his dark hair, and the kind of soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen. A leather satchel hung across his chest, and his boots shone despite the dust. City man, lawyer probably. Thatch stepped out of the barn, the rifle now held casually in the crook of his arm, not threatening, just present. "Help you with something." The man turned, and his smile was all politeness with nothing warm behind it. "Good morning. I'm looking for a woman and child who may have passed through this area recently. Rosalind Adelaide Fletcher and her daughter, Pearl." Thatch's gut tightened, but he kept his face neutral. "What's your interest in them?" "I represent the Hartford family of Philadelphia." The man reached into his jacket, slowly watching Thatch's rifle, and pulled out a card. "My name is Ambrose Kincaid, attorney at law." Thatch took the card but didn't look at it, just watched Kincaid's face. "Hartford," he repeated, "not Fletcher." Fletcher was Mrs. Hartford's married name. Her maiden name was Hartford. The family has been concerned about her welfare since learning of the tragedy that befell her husband. Concerned. Thatch let the word hang there. After how long, Kincaid's smile never wavered. "I'm not at liberty to discuss family matters with strangers, Mr. Crane. Thatcher Crane. And this is my land you're standing on." "Of course, Mr. Crane." Kincaid's eyes drifted past Thatch toward the house. "Is Mrs. Fletcher here?" Before Thatch could answer, the door opened. Rosa stood on the porch, one hand on the doorframe. She'd gone pale, all the color draining from her face as she took in Kincaid's presence. "Ambrose." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Fletcher." Kincaid's smile widened. "How delightful to see you looking so well, considering your recent ordeal." Rosa descended the porch steps slowly, favoring her injured shoulder. Pearl appeared in the doorway, behind her eyes wide with confusion and fear. "How did you find me?" Rosa asked. "Your husband's death was reported by a passing trader. We've had investigators searching for you for weeks." Kincaid pulled a sealed envelope from his satchel. "Your mother has been quite worried." "My mother?" Rosa's laugh held no humor. "Is that what she told you?" "She asked me to deliver this." He held out the envelope. Rosa didn't take it, just stared at it like it was a snake that might bite. "What does it say?" Rosa asked. Kincaid broke the seal and read aloud, his voice taking on a formal tone. "Rosalind returned to Philadelphia immediately with Pearl. Your reckless decisions have endangered my granddaughter long enough. If you refuse, I will petition for custody of the child. I have consulted with the finest attorneys in the state, and they assure me I have grounds. Do not test me on this. Mother." The words fell like stones into still water, ripples spreading outward. Pearl made a small sound, half gasp, half whimper. Rosa's hand went to her daughter's shoulder, pulling her close. "She can't," Rosa said. "Pearl is my daughter." "Mrs. Fletcher, your mother is prepared to argue that you are unfit." Kincaid's tone was almost apologetic. "Almost. You fled Philadelphia against her wishes, married a man she deemed unsuitable, dragged a child into the wilderness where you were attacked, your husband killed, and you yourself grievously wounded. And now," his gaze swept the modest ranch, "you're living in poverty with a stranger." "I'm her housekeeper," Rosa said quickly, too quickly. "Mr. Crane hired me for room and board." Kincaid raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And the child, I heard her calling him something else earlier. What was it?" He paused, pretending to remember. "Ah, yes, Mr. Thatch. How familiar." Thatch's jaw clenched. He wanted to throw this snake off his property, wanted to put a bullet through that smug smile. But he knew men like Kincaid. Violence would only give them ammunition. "State your business and leave," Thatch said. His voice was quiet, but there was iron underneath. "My business, Mr. Crane, is to inform Mrs. Fletcher that she has 4 weeks to return to Philadelphia voluntarily. If she refuses, Mrs. Genevieve Hartford will file for custody in territorial court here in Wyoming." "On what grounds?" Rosa demanded. "Neglect, endangerment, financial instability, living arrangements of questionable propriety." Kincaid smiled. "Shall I continue?" "This is insane. I'm her mother." "You're a mother who has demonstrated poor judgment repeatedly, who has put her daughter in harm's way, who is now dependent on the charity of strangers." Kincaid slipped the letter back into his satchel. "Mrs. Hartford can offer Pearl safety, education, and a future befitting her station. Can you—" "Her station," Rosa's voice rose. "Pearl is 6 years old. She doesn't have a station. She's the heir to a considerable fortune, Mrs. Fletcher. Surely even you can see that she deserves better than this." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Heir. Fortune. Thatch's mind clicked pieces into place. This wasn't about a grandmother's concern. This was about money. Always was when lawyers got involved. "How much?" he asked. Kincaid turned to him. "I beg your pardon. How much is the child worth to the Hartford family?" A flicker of something crossed Kincaid's face. Annoyance, maybe, or respect for someone who understood the game. "Mr. Hartford, Rosalind's father, passed away 6 months ago. His will left a trust of $250,000 to his granddaughter Pearl, to be administered by her legal guardian." A fortune. More money than Thatch would see in 10 lifetimes. "And if Mrs. Hartford has custody," Thatch said slowly, "she controls the trust." "She controls it for Pearl's benefit, yes. Funny how that works out for her." Kincaid's smile went cold. "I would be careful about making accusations, Mr. Crane. Slander is a serious matter. So is trying to steal a child from her mother. No one is stealing anyone. We're acting in Pearl's best interests." "Like hell you are." Rosa put a hand on Thatch's arm. Light touch, but it stopped him from saying something he'd regret. 4 weeks, she said to Kincaid. "Is that what you said? 4 weeks to return voluntarily. Otherwise we file in court." "Get off my property," Thatch said. Kincaid smiled again, that same empty professional smile, and mounted his horse with practiced ease. "Mrs. Fletcher, I truly hope you'll see reason. This doesn't have to be unpleasant." He tipped his hat. "Good day to you both." They watched him ride away, dust rising in his wake. Neither spoke until he disappeared over the ridge. Then Rosa's knees buckled. Thatch caught her before she fell, one arm around her waist. She was shaking, whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't lose her. She's all I have left of Daniel." Pearl ran down from the porch, wrapping her arms around both of them. "Mama, don't let them take me. Please." Thatch held them both, these two broken people who'd stumbled into his life and turned it upside down. He could feel Rosa's tears soaking through his shirt, could feel Pearl's small body pressed against his leg. And in that moment, Thatcher Crane made a decision. "They won't take her," he said, voice hard and certain. "I won't let them." Rosa pulled back to look at him. "How, Thatch, they have money. Lawyers. My mother has judges in her pocket back in Philadelphia." "This isn't Philadelphia. This is Wyoming territory." Thatch's mind was already working through possibilities. "We need a lawyer, a good one." "With what money? I've got some saved. I can't ask you to—" "You're not asking. I'm offering." He looked down at Pearl, who was watching him with those two old eyes. "Nobody's taking this child anywhere she doesn't want to go." The ride to Cheyenne took a full day. Thatch left before dawn, promising Rosa he'd be back by the following evening. He took his best horse and enough money to hire whoever he needed to hire. The town was bigger than he remembered, or maybe he'd just forgotten what crowds looked like after years of solitude. People everywhere, horses and wagons clogging the streets, the sound of hammers and saws as new buildings went up. Progress, civilization, all the things Thatch had run away from. He found the law offices on 3rd Street, 3 of them clustered together like vultures. The first 2 turned him away. Too busy, they said, though Thatch suspected they just didn't want a case against Philadelphia money. The 3rd office was smaller. Barely more than a shack, really, with a hand-painted sign that read, "Augustus Freeman, Esquire, Attorney at Law." Thatch tied his horse and went inside. The interior was cramped books stacked everywhere in precarious towers. A desk sat buried under papers. Behind it sat a man who looked up when Thatch entered. Augustus Freeman was perhaps 45, though hard living made him look older. His skin was darker than any man Thatch had seen in these parts, and his hands bore the calluses of someone who'd done hard labor before taking up law books. "Help you?" Freeman's voice was educated, careful. "Need a lawyer." "Well, you're in the right place, though I should warn you I'm not popular with certain folks around here." Freeman gestured to his skin. "In case you hadn't noticed." "Don't care about that," Thatch said. "Care about whether you're good at your job." Something shifted in Freeman's expression. "Respect, maybe. Sit down. Tell me what you need." Thatch sat and told the story. All of it. Finding Rosa and Pearl on the plains, the attack, the recovery, Kincaid's visit, the threat of custody battle. Freeman listened without interrupting, making notes on a pad of paper. When Thatch finished, the lawyer sat back and studied him. "You understand what you're up against?" Freeman asked. "The Hartford family has resources, connections. They can make this very difficult." "I figured." "And you're still willing to fight?" "Yes." "Why, these people aren't family. You've known them, what, 3 weeks?" Thatch thought about that. About Pearl's laughter when she learned to read. About Rosa's smile. About the way his house felt less empty with them in it. "Because it's right," he said finally. Freeman studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "All right, here's what we're facing. They'll argue Mrs. Fletcher is unfit, no income, no permanent residence, questionable living situation. They'll paint you as either a predator taking advantage of a desperate woman or a fool being manipulated. And how do we fight that? We need to establish stability, witnesses who can testify to Mrs. Fletcher's character and Pearl's welfare. And we need to solve the living situation problem. What problem? An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man. Out here, that's trouble. Court won't like it. Thatch saw where this was going. You're saying we should get married. I'm saying it would strengthen your case considerably, make you Pearl's legal stepfather, give the family legal protection. Freeman leaned forward. But I won't lie to you, Mr. Crane. It has to be a real marriage. If they can prove it's a fraud, you'll lose everything and possibly face charges. Real marriage. Thatch turned the words over in his mind. He barely knew Rosa. Hadn't thought about marriage since Abigail died. Hadn't wanted to. The idea of binding himself to someone again, of opening himself up to that kind of loss. But then he thought about Pearl calling him Mr. Thatch, about Rosa's hand on his arm, about the way they'd started to feel like family. I'll talk to her, Thatch said. You do that. In the meantime, I'll start gathering information on the Hartford family, see if there's any skeletons we can use. Freeman named his fee $200, most of what Thatch had saved. Thatch didn't hesitate. Done. They shook hands. Freeman's grip was firm, and his eyes held something that might have been hope. One more thing, Freeman said as Thatch stood to leave. Whatever happens in court, you need to be ready for them to come at you hard. Your past, your finances, your character, everything will be fair game. I've got nothing to hide. Everyone's got something to hide, Mr. Crane. Question is whether it's something that matters. Thatch rode through the night, arriving back at the ranch just after dawn. Exhaustion dragged at him, but he needed to talk to Rosa before he slept. He found her in the kitchen making breakfast. Pearl was still asleep in the loft. The house smelled like coffee and frying bacon, homey smells that Thatch hadn't realized he'd been missing. You're back, Rosa said, relief evident in her voice. Did you find someone? Yeah, lawyer named Augustus Freeman. He's good. Now Thatch poured himself coffee, buying time. But there's something we need to discuss. Rosa set down the spatula, sensing the weight in his words. What is it? Freeman says the living situation is a problem. Unmarried woman, unmarried man. Court won't look favorably on it. So what do we do? Thatch met her eyes. He suggested we get married. The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. Rosa stared at him, lips parted in shock. Married, she repeated. For Pearl. Legal protection. Would make me her stepfather, give us standing in court. Thatch was talking too fast, the words tumbling out. Freeman said it has to be real, though. Can't be a fraud or we'll lose everything. Rosa sank into a chair. Thatch, I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. But marriage, that's not something to enter into lightly. I know that. Do you? Rosa looked up at him, eyes searching his face. Because I've been married. I know what it means, what it requires. And I can't, her voice broke, I can't be what a wife should be. Not now. Maybe not ever. Daniel's death, it broke something in me. Thatch pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Then we'll both be broken together. Figure it out as we go. This is insane. Probably. We barely know each other. I know you'd die before you let anything happen to Pearl. I know you're stronger than anyone I've ever met. I know. He stopped searching for words. I know that having you and Pearl here has made me feel alive again. First time since Abigail and Clara died. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. That's not love. Maybe not, but it's something. And sometimes something is enough to build on. They sat in silence for a long moment, the bacon starting to burn in the pan. Neither moved to fix it. If we do this, Rosa said finally, there can be no secrets, no lies. We're partners working toward a common goal, keeping Pearl safe and building a life that works for all of us. Agreed. And if feelings develop, fine. If not, we're still committed to making it work. Agreed. Rosa held out her hand. Partners. Thatch took her hand. Her skin was warm against his. Partners. They shook on it like they were sealing a business deal. But when Thatch looked into Rosa's eyes, he saw something there beyond simple agreement. A spark of hope, fragile and fierce at the same time. Maybe this was crazy. Maybe they were both fools. But Thatch had done plenty of foolish things in his 38 years, and this felt like the first one that might actually matter. When? Rosa asked. Soon as possible. Freeman said we need time to establish the marriage before court. 4 weeks isn't much. Today, Thatch nodded, if you're willing. Rosa stood, moved to the stove, pulled the burned bacon from the pan. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Then I suppose I should wake Pearl and tell her she's about to get a stepfather. They rode into town that afternoon, all three of them squeezed onto Thatch's big gelding. Pearl sat in front, chattering excitedly about the prospect of having a real family again. Rosa rode behind Thatch, her arms around his waist, and he tried not to think too hard about how right that felt. Reverend Josiah Warren presided over the ceremony in his small church. The only witnesses were Warren's wife Martha and the church sexton, an old-timer named Henry, who'd known Thatch since he first came to Wyoming. It wasn't fancy, no flowers, no music, no guests filling the pews, just 5 people in a dusty church on a hot August afternoon. But when Reverend Warren asked Thatch if he took Rosalind Adelaide Fletcher to be his lawfully wedded wife, Thatch looked into her eyes and said, I do, with more certainty than he'd felt about anything in years. And when Rosa said the same words back to him, her voice trembling, but clear, something in Thatch's chest loosened, something that had been locked tight since Abigail died. You may kiss the bride, Warren said with a gentle smile. Thatch had thought about this moment during the ride to town, wondered if it would be awkward, forced, a formality they had to endure. But when he leaned in and pressed his lips to Rosa's, there was nothing awkward about it. The kiss was brief, chaste, appropriate for a church, but there was electricity underneath, a promise of something more given time. Pearl clapped her hands with delight. Does this mean you're my papa now? Thatch knelt down to her level, suddenly nervous. That's up to you, Pearl. You can call me whatever feels right. Pearl studied him with that serious expression she got sometimes. Then she threw her arms around his neck. Pa, she whispered. I'll call you Pa. Thatch hugged her back, this child who wasn't his blood, but felt like his heart nonetheless. Over her head he saw Rosa crying happy tears this time, and Martha Warren dabbing at her own eyes with a handkerchief. They signed the marriage certificate, Henry and Martha adding their signatures as witnesses. Reverend Warren filed the document with practiced efficiency, then shook Thatch's hand. I'll be praying for you both, Warren said. Marriage is hard work, even in the best circumstances. But I've seen the way you look at them, Thatch. I think you'll do right by these ladies. That's the plan. Plans are good. Love is better. Give it time. They were walking back to the horse when a familiar carriage appeared at the end of the street. Black. Expensive. 4 horses. Thatch's gut tightened. He knew that carriage. It rolled to a stop in front of them, and Ambrose Kincaid stepped out. But he wasn't alone. Behind him emerged a woman who could only be Genevieve Hartford. She was perhaps 58, dressed in black silk that probably cost more than Thatch made in a year. Her silver hair was swept up in an elaborate style, and diamonds glittered at her throat and ears. But it was her face that struck Thatch, aristocratic, coldly beautiful, and utterly without warmth as she looked at her daughter. Rosalind, Genevieve said. Her voice was cultured, educated, sharp as a blade. Rosa had gone rigid beside him. Mother? Genevieve's gaze swept over them. Rosa, in her simple dress, Pearl holding tight to Thatch's hand. Thatch himself in his Sunday suit that had seen better days. I see you've made your choice, Genevieve said. Poverty and pride over family and security. I've made the choice you never gave me, Rosa replied, to live my own life. And look where that's gotten you, widowed, wounded, desperate enough to marry, she looked at Thatch with barely disguised contempt. This. Thatch felt his temper flare but kept it leashed. Getting angry was what she wanted. We just got married, Rosa said. Legal and proper. So whatever you're planning, the marriage changes nothing. Genevieve's smile was cold. If anything, it proves my point. You've known this man, 3 weeks, and you've already bound yourself and my granddaughter to him. That's not protection, Rosalind, that's desperation. Kincaid stepped forward with papers. Mrs. Crane, you're being served notice. Mrs. Hartford is filing for custody of Pearl in territorial court. Hearing is set for 4 weeks from today. He handed the papers to Rosa, who took them with shaking hands. This is insane, she said. You can't just take my daughter. I'm not taking her. I'm saving her. Genevieve's voice softened, almost convincing in its concern. From your reckless choices, from poverty, from a life of hardship she doesn't deserve. She deserves to be with her mother. She deserves to be with family who can provide for her, who can give her the education and opportunities her station demands. Genevieve looked at Pearl, who shrank back against Thatch. Hello, Pearl. I'm your grandmother. I've come to take you home. I am home, Pearl said, her voice small but defiant. Genevieve's expression flickered surprise, maybe, or hurt, but she recovered quickly. Mr. Kincaid will be in touch with the details, she said, returning her attention to Rosa. I suggest you hire counsel, though I doubt there's a lawyer in this backwards territory who can stand against what I'm bringing. She climbed back into the carriage, Kincaid following. Before the door closed, she looked out one last time. I'm giving you one chance, Rosalind. Come home. Bring Pearl. We'll forget all this nonsense. You can have the life you were meant to have. I have the life I chose, Rosa said. Then you'll lose everything. The door slammed shut. The carriage rolled away, leaving them standing in the dusty street. Rosa was shaking the papers clutched in her hands. Pearl had buried her face against Thatch's leg. She can't win, Rosa whispered. Can she? We're married now. That has to count for something. Thatch wished he could promise her victory, promise that love and determination would be enough. But he'd seen too much of the world to believe in fairy tales. We'll fight, he said instead. Together. That's all we can do. But as they rode back to the ranch in the fading light, Thatch couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into a storm they weren't prepared for, and that the worst was yet to come. The weeks before the trial passed in a blur of preparation and growing dread. Augustus Freeman came to the ranch 3 times, each visit bringing more bad news. Genevieve Hartford had hired not 1, but 3 lawyers from back east. They were building a case that painted Rosa as unstable, reckless a danger to her own child. And they were digging into Thatch's past with the thoroughness of men who got paid by the billable hour. They'll attack the marriage, Freeman warned during his 3rd visit. Try to prove it's fraudulent. They'll say you barely knew each other, that it was a desperate ploy to avoid losing custody. It was, Rosa said quietly. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. At least at first. At first, Thatch agreed. He stood by the window watching Pearl play with the barn cats in the yard. Not anymore, Freeman looked between them. You'll need to prove that, to the judge, to everyone watching. They'll be looking for cracks, for signs this isn't real. It's real, Rosa said. She met Thatch's eyes across the room. Whatever it started as, it's real now. And it was. Thatch couldn't say exactly when it had shifted, when sharing a house and meals and quiet evenings had become something deeper. But somewhere in the past weeks, Rosa had stopped being a stranger he was helping and started being his wife, his partner, his. The thought terrified him almost as much as the prospect of losing them both. We need witnesses, Freeman continued, pulling out his notes. People who can testify to the marriage being genuine, to Pearl being well cared for. They made a list. Reverend Warren, who'd performed the ceremony. His wife Martha, who'd watched Thatch transform from a ghost into a living man. Dr. Caleb Reed, the town physician, who could examine Pearl and testify to her health. Miss Fay Sullivan, the schoolteacher who'd been working with Pearl 3 days a week. It should have been enough. Would have been maybe if they were up against anyone but the Hartford family. But 2 weeks before the trial, the threats started. Reverend Warren came to the ranch looking 10 years older than his 65 years. His hands shook as he accepted the whiskey Thatch poured him. "I'm sorry," Warren said, not meeting their eyes. "The church board met yesterday. They've given me an ultimatum: withdraw from testifying or they'll remove me as pastor." "They can't do that," Rosa protested. "They can. The Hartford family made a substantial donation to the church building fund, with strings attached, it seems." Warren's voice was bitter. "I wanted to tell them to go to hell. But Martha, we've been here 30 years. This church is our life. If I lose it, we have nothing. Nowhere to go." Thatch wanted to argue, wanted to shame the old man into doing the right thing. But he'd lived long enough to know that doing the right thing was a luxury not everyone could afford. "I understand," he said instead. "I'm so sorry." Warren stood, unable to stay any longer, unable to look at the disappointment on their faces. "I'll pray for you, for what it's worth." After he left, Rosa turned to Thatch with fear in her eyes. "If they got to Reverend Warren, they'll go after the others too," Thatch finished. "Yeah, I know." He was right. Dr. Reed came 2 days later with the same story. The medical board had threatened to revoke his license if he testified. Miss Sullivan didn't even have the courage to come in person. She sent a note saying the school board had terminated her employment for moral reasons, and she was leaving Wyoming entirely. By the end of the second week, they'd lost everyone except Martha Warren, who defied her husband and the church board, both by refusing to back down. "Let them throw me out," she told Thatch when he tried to release her from her promise. "I'm too old to start caring what people think. Besides, I know true love when I see it, and you two have got something worth fighting for." But one elderly witness against the might of the Hartford legal machine wasn't going to be enough. They all knew it. The night before they were set to leave for Cheyenne for the trial that would decide Pearl's fate, Thatch found Rosa sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the darkness. He sat beside her without speaking. They'd gotten good at that comfortable silences that said more than words could. "We're going to lose," Rosa said finally. "Aren't we?" Thatch wanted to lie, wanted to promise her victory and happily ever after. But they'd built this partnership on honesty, and he wouldn't undermine that now. "I don't know," he said. "Freeman's good, and we've got the truth on our side." "The truth." Rosa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My mother has money and power and lawyers who can twist the truth into whatever shape serves them. What do we have? A marriage of 3 weeks, a borrowed house, and good intentions." "We have love," Thatch said quietly. Rosa turned to look at him. In the moonlight, her face was all shadows and angles, beautiful and broken and strong. "Do we?" she asked. "Or do we have convenience dressed up in wedding vows?" Thatch took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warm night. "I can't speak for you," he said, "but I know what I feel, and it's not convenience." "What is it then?" He thought about the question, about waking up every morning to the sound of Pearl's laughter, about watching Rosa move through his kitchen like she belonged there, about the way his chest tightened when he thought about losing them. "It's home," he said finally. "First time since Abigail and Clara died that I've felt like I had one." Rosa's eyes filled with tears. "Thatch, you don't have to say anything back. I just need you to know whatever happens tomorrow, whatever that judge decides, I don't regret any of it. The marriage, the fight, none of it." "I love you," Rosa whispered. "God help me, I didn't mean to, didn't want to. But somewhere between dying on that plane and sitting here with you, I fell in love with you, Thatcher Crane." Thatch pulled her close, and she came willingly, burying her face against his chest. He could feel her shaking with tears, with fear, with the weight of everything they stood to lose. "Then we fight," he said into her hair. "We go into that courtroom tomorrow, and we fight like hell. And if we lose," Thatch thought about that, about what he'd do if some judge decided his family wasn't real enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't wealthy enough to stay together. "Then we run," he said. "Take Pearl and disappear. Canada, maybe. Or Mexico. Somewhere the Hartford money can't reach." Rosa pulled back to look at him. "You'd do that? Give up everything, the ranch, your life here, all of it. This ranch is just land. You and Pearl, your family, and family matters more than dirt." She kissed him then. Not the chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deeper, desperate and tender, and full of promise all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "We should get some sleep," Rosa said. "Long day tomorrow," but neither moved. They sat on those porch steps until the moon set, holding each other against the darkness and whatever the morning would bring. Cheyenne Territorial Courthouse was more imposing than Thatch remembered. 3 stories of red brick and white columns designed to intimidate. It worked. The courtroom was packed when they entered. Seemed like half the territory had come to watch the show Poor Cowboy and His New Bride versus Philadelphia Money. Better than a theater production. Genevieve Hartford sat on the right side of the room, flanked by her legal team. 3 lawyers in expensive suits carrying enough leather satchels to stock a tannery. Ambrose Kincaid was there too, looking smug and well-rested. Thatch, Rosa, and Pearl took their seats on the left with Augustus Freeman. The lawyer looked exhausted. He'd been up until 3 in the morning, preparing, and it showed. "Remember," Freeman whispered as the bailiff called for everyone to rise. "Let me handle the talking. Don't get emotional. Don't get angry. Give them nothing they can use." The judge entered Augustus Holloway, 68 years old, with a face like granite and eyes that had seen everything twice. He settled into his chair and surveyed the courtroom with the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "Be seated," Holloway said. His voice carried authority earned over decades on the bench. "We're here today to consider a petition for custody of the minor child, Pearl May Fletcher, filed by Mrs. Genevieve Hartford of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania." He looked down at the papers before him, then up at the assembled crowd. "This is a courtroom, not a circus. Anyone who can't behave appropriately will be removed." "Understood." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the spectators. "Good. Mr. Kincaid, you may present your opening statement." Kincaid rose with practiced grace. He was good, Thatch had to give him that. His voice was smooth, reasonable, almost sympathetic as he laid out Genevieve's case. "Your Honor, this is a tragedy masquerading as a love story. A desperate woman, freshly widowed and wounded, falls into the arms of the first man who shows her kindness. They marry after 3 weeks of acquaintance. They claim it's love, but the timing suggests otherwise." He paced before the judge, every movement calculated. "Mrs. Hartford doesn't question her daughter's love for Pearl, but love alone doesn't feed a child, doesn't educate her, doesn't give her the opportunities she deserves. Mrs. Crane," he said the name like it tasted bad, "has no income of her own. She's entirely dependent on Mr. Crane, a man she barely knows. They live in a 2-room cabin 5 miles from the nearest town. There's no school within reasonable distance, no doctor, no society of any kind." Kincaid turned to face the spectators, including them, in his appeal. "Meanwhile, Mrs. Hartford can offer Pearl every advantage: education at the finest schools, medical care of the highest caliber, a future limited only by the child's own ambitions, and yes, there's money, a trust left by Pearl's grandfather. But that money is for Pearl's benefit, administered by a grandmother who wants only the best for her." He returned to the judge. "We're not trying to take a child from her mother, Your Honor. We're trying to give that child the life she deserves." Kincaid sat down to approving murmurs from the Hartford side of the room. Freeman rose. He looked shabby next to Kincaid. His suit was threadbare, his boots scuffed. But when he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. "Your Honor, Mr. Kincaid is right about one thing. This is a tragedy. But the tragedy isn't Mrs. Crane's marriage. It's a grandmother who abandoned her daughter for years, who showed no interest in her granddaughter, until money entered the picture. Freeman pulled papers from his satchel. Mrs. Hartford disowned Rosalind when she married Daniel Fletcher 6 years ago, cut her off completely. Never wrote, never visited, never acknowledged Pearl's existence. Then Mr. Hartford dies, leaves a fortune to his granddaughter, and suddenly Mrs. Hartford remembers she has a daughter. He walked toward the judge's bench. As for the marriage, yes, it happened quickly, but anyone who spent 5 minutes with the Cranes can see it's genuine. They're building a life together, a modest life perhaps, but an honest one. And Pearl is thriving. She's healthy, happy, and loved. Freeman's voice hardened. This isn't about what's best for Pearl. It's about control. Mrs. Hartford spent years controlling her daughter. When Rosalind finally escaped, Mrs. Hartford found a new way to maintain control through her granddaughter, through money, through the very lawyers standing in this courtroom. He returned to his seat. We'll prove that Pearl belongs with her mother, that this marriage is real, that love and stability matter more than bank accounts, and we'll expose this custody petition for what it really is, a wealthy woman's attempt to buy a child. Judge Holloway made notes, his face unreadable. Call your first witness, Mr. Kincaid. The petitioner calls Mrs. Genevieve Hartford. Genevieve took the stand with perfect composure. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, her voice steady and clear. Kincaid led her through the testimony with skill. She painted herself as a concerned grandmother forced to watch from afar as her daughter made one poor decision after another. I loved Rosalind, Genevieve said, and Thatch almost believed the tears in her eyes. I still love her, but love doesn't mean enabling self-destruction. When she insisted on marrying Daniel Fletcher, I tried to warn her. He was a dreamer with no prospects. I knew it would end badly. And did it? Kincaid prompted. He dragged my daughter and granddaughter into the wilderness, where they were attacked by criminals. He was killed. Rosalind was gravely wounded. Pearl watched it all happen. Genevieve's voice broke convincingly. I can't stand by and watch my granddaughter suffer because of my daughter's stubbornness. Freeman stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Hartford, when did you last see your daughter before she left Philadelphia? 2 years ago. 2 years. And in that time did you write to her? No. Visit? No. Send any form of communication at all? Genevieve's jaw tightened. No. But you claim to love her. I do. Sometimes love means letting people face the consequences of their choices, or abandoning them when they don't do what you want. Freeman picked up a paper. Your husband's will was filed 6 months ago. When did you hire Mr. Kincaid? 6 months ago. Interesting timing. Your husband leaves money to Pearl, and suddenly you remember you have a daughter and granddaughter. That's not. How much is your legal team costing Mrs. Hartford? I don't see how that's relevant. Answer the question. Genevieve glanced at Kincaid, who nodded. Approximately $20,000. Murmurs swept through the courtroom. $20,000 more than most men made in 10 years. $20,000 to take a child from her mother, Freeman said. Meanwhile, Pearl's trust is worth a fortune. Who controls that money if you have custody? I would administer it for Pearl's benefit. For Pearl's benefit? The same way you're spending $20,000 for her benefit. Freeman let that sink in. No further questions. The afternoon brought more witnesses. A doctor from Philadelphia testified about the primitive medical facilities in Wyoming Territory. A teacher spoke about the educational opportunities available in Eastern schools. Both were professional, polished, damning. Freeman's cross-examinations poked holes where he could, but the damage was done. The Hartford team was building a picture of life with Rosa and Thatch as barely above poverty, while life with Genevieve offered every advantage. When court adjourned for the day, Thatch felt like he'd been beaten. They filed out into the late afternoon sun, and Rosa's hand found his. That was bad, she whispered. It'll get worse tomorrow, Freeman said. He looked as defeated as Thatch felt. They're calling you to the stand first thing, both of you, and they're going to come at you hard. That night in the modest hotel room they'd rented, Thatch held Rosa while she cried. Pearl was asleep in the bed they'd made on the floor, exhausted by the day's stress. "I can't lose her," Rosa said for the 100th time. "I can't." Thatch didn't tell her it would be okay, didn't make promises he couldn't keep, just held her and wished he could take this burden from her shoulders. But some burdens had to be carried together. Morning came too soon. Thatch took the stand first. Kincaid approached him like a hunter stalking prey. "Mr. Crane, you married Rosalind Fletcher after knowing her for how long?" 3 weeks. 3 weeks! And in that time, did you fall in love?" Thatch thought about lying, about giving them the fairy tale they wanted to hear. But he and Rosa had built this on honesty. "No, not in 3 weeks," surprised murmurs. Kincaid smiled. "So you married a woman you didn't love." "I married a woman I was starting to care about. Love came later." "How convenient." "Love came after the legal benefits of marriage." Kincaid pulled papers from his satchel. "Speaking of benefits, you're aware that Pearl stands to inherit a substantial sum." "I am now, wasn't then." "You expect us to believe you married into this situation blindly." "I married to protect a child who needed protecting. The money didn't enter into it." "Really?" "Because from where I'm standing, you saw an opportunity. A desperate woman with a wealthy family. Marry her, gain control of the child, control the inheritance." Thatch's temper flared. "That's a damn lie." Judge Holloway's gavel came down. "Mr. Crane, control yourself." "Sorry, Your Honor." Thatch forced himself to calm. "But it's not true. I don't want the Hartford money. Never have." "Then prove it," Kincaid said. "Renounce the inheritance right now. Sign papers giving up any claim Pearl has to the trust." The courtroom went silent. Thatch looked at Freeman, who was scribbling a note, at Rosa, whose eyes were wide with shock, at Pearl, who was watching him with complete trust. "If that's what it takes," Thatch said slowly, "then fine. Draw up your papers." Now it was Kincaid's turn to look shocked. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "The court will note that Mr. Crane only offers to renounce the money after being challenged. How genuine can that be?" But Freeman was on his feet. "Your Honor, my client is willing to sign documents right now today, renouncing any claim to the Hartford Trust. If the petitioner is sincere about this being for Pearl's benefit and not the money, they should welcome this development." Judge Holloway leaned forward. "Mr. Kincaid, do you have such documents?" "No, Your Honor, but—" "Then have them prepared. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned." The spectators erupted in conversation. Thatch stepped down from the witness stand and Rosa threw her arms around him. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "That's Pearl's entire future you just gave away." "Pearl's future is with us," Thatch said. "Not in some bank account." Freeman joined them, looking cautiously optimistic for the first time. "This could work. If we renounce the trust, we remove their primary motivation. Makes the whole custody battle look like what it really is, a grandmother trying to buy a child." That night, Freeman had papers drawn up, legal documents renouncing any claim Pearl May Fletcher Crane had to the Hartford Trust. Every cent would revert to the estate. Thatch and Rosa signed without hesitation. The next morning, the courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread about Thatch's gambit, and everyone wanted to see how it played out. When Judge Holloway called them to order, Freeman stood immediately. "Your Honor, my clients wish to present documents signed last night." He brought the papers forward. "Mr. and Mrs. Crane have legally renounced any claim Pearl has to the Hartford inheritance. The entire trust forfeited." The courtroom exploded into noise. Holloway banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order! I will have order." When the room finally quieted, he studied the documents carefully. "These appear to be in order, notarized and witnessed." He looked at Genevieve. "Mrs. Hartford, your response." Genevieve sat frozen, her carefully composed mask cracking. Thatch watched her face cycle through emotions: shock, fury, calculation. "Your Honor," she said, finally standing, "this changes nothing. My concern has always been for Pearl's welfare, not the money." "Is that so?" Judge Holloway's tone was skeptical. "Because it seems to me that without the trust you have very little standing here. A grandmother who abandoned her daughter for years, who showed no interest in her granddaughter until a fortune was involved. That's not fair. Fair, Mrs. Hartford, is exactly what I'm trying to be." He set the papers down. "I've heard enough. I'm ready to rule." The courtroom held its collective breath. "Mrs. Hartford, you've presented compelling arguments about the material benefits you can provide. But material benefits aren't everything. This court has seen a young couple willing to sacrifice a fortune to keep their family together. We've seen a child who is clearly thriving despite modest circumstances. And we've seen a grandmother who, whatever her current intentions, has a long history of controlling behavior." He turned to Thatch and Rosa. "Mr. and Mrs. Crane, your marriage may have begun as a matter of convenience, but it appears to have become something real. Pearl is healthy, happy, and loved. That matters more than bank accounts." Judge Holloway picked up his gavel. "I find in favor of the respondents. Custody of Pearl May Fletcher Crane remains with her mother and stepfather. Mrs. Hartford's petition is denied. Case dismissed." The gavel came down with finality. For a moment no one moved. Then Pearl let out a cry of joy and ran to Thatch and Rosa, who swept her up between them. Freeman was grinning. Martha Warren was crying. The spectators were cheering. Across the courtroom, Genevieve Hartford sat alone, her lawyers already gathering their things. She looked smaller somehow, older, defeated. Thatch caught her eye, and for just a moment he saw something there, not anger, but pain. The pain of a woman who'd tried to control everything and ended up with nothing. Then she stood and walked out head high, despite everything. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon sun was bright and warm. Pearl was chattering excitedly, planning all the things they'd do when they got home. Freeman was shaking their hands, promising to send his final bill, but not to worry about it pro bono, he said, for a case that mattered. Rosa turned to Thatch, tears streaming down her face. "We won," she said, like she couldn't quite believe it. "We won," he agreed. She kissed him there on the courthouse steps in front of God and half the territory. Not the chaste kiss from their wedding, but something deep and real and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "Let's go home," Rosa said. "Yeah," Thatch agreed, picking up Pearl and settling her on his shoulders. "Let's go home." And as they walked toward their wagon, toward the long ride back to the ranch and the life they were building together, Thatcher Crane realized something. For the first time since Abigail and Clara died, the word home actually meant something. Not a place, not a building, but the people who filled it with love and laughter and second chances. Family. The family he'd chosen. The family that had chosen him right back. And that was worth more than all the Hartford money in the world. April 1882. Spring came late to Wyoming Territory that year. The snow lingered in the high country until mid-March, and the creeks ran high with meltwater well into April. But when the wildflowers finally bloomed, they came up thick Indian paintbrush and lupine, turning the plains into a carpet of red and purple. Thatch stood in the doorway of the barn, watching Rosa hang laundry on the line he'd strung between two posts last month. Her belly was round now, unmistakable even from a distance. 6 months along doctor. Reed had said when they'd gone to town for the examination, a boy most likely, though the doctor couldn't be certain. Pearl was in the corral working with Copper, the young mare Thatch had been training for her. The girl had taken to horses like she was born to them, and watching her now, confident and laughing as the mare trotted in circles around her, Thatch felt a swell of pride he'd never expected to feel again. His daughter, not by blood, but by choice, by love, by every measure that mattered. "You planning to work today or just stand there wool gathering?" Thatch turned to find Harold Webb grinning at him from inside the barn. Miriam's son had been helping out more since Rosa's pregnancy became obvious, bringing supplies from town, lending a hand with the heavier work, making sure Thatch didn't have to leave the ranch for long stretches. I was thinking, Thatch said. Dangerous occupation for a man your age. Harold pitched another forkful of hay. What about how things change? That they do. Harold leaned on his pitchfork. Ma says she's never seen you happier, says it's like you came back from the dead. Thatch thought about that. About the man he'd been 8 months ago, alone, frozen, going through the motions of living without really being alive. Your mother's a wise woman. Don't tell her that. Her head's big enough already. Harold grinned. Speaking of Ma, she wanted me to invite you all for Sunday dinner. Says she hasn't seen the family in 2 weeks and she's going through withdrawal. Family. The word still caught Thatch, sometimes unexpected and warm. We'll be there, he said. After Harold left, Thatch walked out to where Rosa was finishing with the laundry. She straightened slowly, one hand pressed to her lower back. Getting harder, he asked. Everything's getting harder, including breathing. But she was smiling. Dr. Reed says that's normal. Baby's growing pressing on everything. Thatch put his hand on her belly, feeling the solid weight of their child. As if in response, there was a flutter of movement beneath his palm. Strong one, Rosa said, just like his father, or her father. Dr. Reed said boy. Dr. Reed also said Pearl would be shy and quiet, and look how that turned out. They both turned to watch Pearl, who was now attempting to teach Copper to bow. The horse was having none of it, but Pearl's determination was admirable. She's happy, Rosa said softly. Really, truly happy. I wasn't sure that would ever happen again, after everything. Kids are resilient. It's more than that. Rosa leaned against him. It's you. You gave her safety, stability, a father who shows up every single day. I just do what needs doing. That's exactly what I mean. She turned to look up at him. You don't make promises you can't keep. You just quietly keep every promise you make. Thatch didn't know what to say to that, so he kissed her instead. Gentle, lingering, full of the love they'd built slowly over the past months. When they pulled apart, Rosa was blushing. Still gets me, she said. Every time. Good. Means I'm doing something right. They walked back to the house together, Thatch matching his pace to hers. Inside, the main room had changed significantly since last summer. New curtains on the windows. A rocking chair by the fireplace where Rosa liked to sit and knit. Children's books on the shelf Pearl had learned to read from. A cradle in the corner waiting. Home. Letter came while you were in the barn, Rosa said, gesturing to the table. From Philadelphia. Thatch's gut tightened. They hadn't heard from Genevieve since the trial. Part of him had hoped they never would. You read it, he asked. Not yet. I thought we should open it together. The envelope was expensive paper addressed in elegant script. Thatch broke the seal and pulled out a single page. Dear Rosalind, I write not to reopen old wounds, but perhaps to begin closing them. The past 8 months have given me time to reflect on my actions, on the choices I made and the damage they caused. I was wrong. About Daniel, about you, about what truly matters in this life. The monthly reports from the court monitor speak of a happy, healthy child in a loving home. Pearl is thriving. You are thriving. I can no longer deny that you made the right choice, even if it wasn't the choice I would have made. I don't ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I would ask for something smaller, the chance to know my granddaughter. Not as a guardian or authority figure, but simply as her grandmother. Letters, perhaps, if you're willing. A visit years from now, if Pearl wishes it. I'm not the same woman I was. Losing taught me what having never could. There's one more thing you should know. I've established a school fund in Pearl's name, not for her personal use, but to help other children receive the education she would have had under my care. It seemed a fitting way to honor both her and the lesson she taught me that love matters more than money. I remain with hope for reconciliation. Your mother, Genevieve Hartford. Thatch read the letter twice, trying to find the manipulation, the hidden agenda. But all he saw was an old woman's honest regret. What do you think? Rosa asked quietly. I think people can change. Sometimes. She hurt me, Thatch. For years. She tried to take Pearl. I know. But she's also my mother, and Pearl's grandmother. And maybe, Rosa's voice caught, maybe everyone deserves a second chance. Not everyone earns one. No, but maybe she has. Rosa took the letter from him, reading it again. A school fund, in Pearl's name. That's not nothing. What do you want to do? Rosa was quiet for a long moment. I want to ask Pearl. She's old enough to have a say. If she wants to write to her grandmother, we let her. If she doesn't, we respect that too. Fair enough. They called Pearl in from the corral. She was dusty and sweaty and grinning from ear to ear. Copper almost did it, Pa. She almost bowed. Saw that. You've got a knack for training. Thatch gestured to the chair. Got something to ask you, though. Pearl sat suddenly serious. She'd learned to read adult moods with unsettling accuracy. Your grandmother, your mother's mother, sent a letter, Thatch said. She wants to write to you. Maybe visit someday when you're older, but only if you want to. Pearl looked between them. The lady who tried to take me away, yes. Why does she want to write now? I think she's sorry, Rosa said, for what she did, for how she acted. People say they're sorry lots of times, Pearl said. It doesn't always mean they changed. Thatch was continually amazed by this child's wisdom. You're right, he said, which is why it's your choice. Nobody's forcing anything. Pearl thought about it, her face scrunched in concentration. Can I wait? Think about it. Take all the time you need. Okay. She stood. Can I go back to Copper now? Wash up first. Dinner's in an hour. After Pearl left, Rosa leaned her head on Thatch's shoulder. She's remarkable, isn't she? Gets it from her mother. Flattery. Truth. They sat like that for a while, comfortable in the silence. Outside, Pearl's laughter drifted in through the window, the sound of home. Thatch, Rosa said eventually. Yeah, thank you for all of this, for choosing us. You chose me too. I did. She took his hand, placing it on her belly again. And now we're choosing this one, together. The baby kicked against his palm, strong and sure. A life they'd made, a future they were building. Together, Thatch agreed. 2 months later, on a warm June evening, Rosalind Adelaide Crane gave birth to a son. The labor was long, nearly 12 hours, but Dr. Reed said that was normal for a second child. Thatch spent most of it pacing the porch, driving Harold Webb and Miriam half crazy with his nervous energy. Pearl sat on the steps, clutching her doll, looking far more composed than Thatch felt. "Ma's strong," she said when Thatch made his 100th pass across the porch. "She'll be fine." "I know." "Then why are you wearing a hole in the wood?" Thatch sat down beside her, forcing himself to be still. "Because waiting's harder than doing." Pearl leaned against him. "When the baby comes, will you love it more than me?" The question hit Thatch like a physical blow. He pulled Pearl close, making sure she was looking at him, when he answered. "Pearl May Crane, I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anything. That's not going to change because there's a baby. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. You understand?" "I think so." "You're my daughter, first, always, forever. Nothing changes that." Pearl nodded, satisfied. "Good. Because I don't want to share you. Won't have to. There's plenty of me to go around." When the cry finally came thin and reedy and unmistakably new, Thatch was on his feet before his mind registered the sound. Dr. Reed appeared in the doorway, grinning. "Congratulations, Thatch. You've got a healthy baby boy." Thatch didn't remember moving, but suddenly he was inside, crossing to the bed where Rosa lay, propped on pillows. She looked exhausted, her hair matted with sweat, her face pale. But she was smiling as she cradled a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. "Come meet your son," she said. Thatch approached slowly, almost afraid. The baby was impossibly small, red-faced, and angry at being born. But when Thatch reached out to touch one tiny hand, the fingers wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Thatch whispered. "He is." Rosa looked up at him with tears in her eyes. "What should we name him?" They'd discussed this late at night when Rosa couldn't sleep, had made lists and debated and never quite settled on anything. But looking at his son now, Thatch knew. "Daniel," he said, "for your first husband, the man who loved you enough to take you west." Rosa's tears spilled over. "And Thomas for your middle name, Daniel Thomas Crane." "Daniel Thomas," Thatch repeated, testing it. "Danny." Pearl appeared in the doorway, Miriam behind her. The girl approached the bed cautiously, eyes wide. "Is that him?" she asked. "This is your baby brother," Rosa said. "Come see." Pearl climbed carefully onto the bed, peering at the baby with intense scrutiny. Danny chose that moment to open his eyes, dark blue unfocused, taking in his first blurry views of the world. "He's so small," Pearl said, and read. "You were this small once," Rosa said. "Hard to believe I know. Can I touch him?" "Gentle." Pearl reached out one finger, stroking Danny's cheek with surprising delicacy. The baby turned toward the touch, mouth working. "He likes me," Pearl announced. "Of course he does," Thatch said. "You're his big sister." The word settled over Pearl like a benediction. Big sister, a role, a responsibility, a place in this family that was uniquely hers. "I'm going to teach him everything," Pearl decided. "How to ride horses and read books and catch frogs, and maybe let him learn to walk first," Rosa suggested, laughing. That night after Dr. Reed had gone and Miriam had helped Rosa settle in for sleep, Thatch sat in the rocking chair with Danny in his arms. Pearl had finally been convinced to go to bed, though she'd insisted on sleeping on the floor next to Rosa, in case Mama needs anything. The baby was asleep, tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. So fragile, so completely dependent, so utterly precious. Thatch thought about Abigail and Clara, about the family he'd lost all those years ago. The grief would always be there, he'd learned that. You didn't get over losing people you loved, you just learned to carry the weight. But now he had this. Rosa sleeping peacefully in the bed that had sat empty for so long. Pearl curled up on the floor, one hand stretched toward her mother even in sleep, and Danny warm and alive in his arms. A second chance, a new family, a future he'd never expected to have. "Your sister's going to be a terror," Thatch whispered to his sleeping son. "Always telling you what to do, how to do it. She's bossy like her mother." Danny made a soft sound, something between a sigh and a gurgle. "But she'll also protect you with everything she has. She's fierce that way. And your mother's the strongest person I've ever met. You're lucky to have her." He stood carrying Danny to the cradle, laying him down with careful hands. The baby stirred, but didn't wake. "And me," Thatch said quietly, "I'm just a man who got a second chance. I'll probably make mistakes, do things wrong, but I'll show up every day. I'll love you and your sister and your mother with everything I have. That's my promise." He started to turn away, but movement caught his eye. Rosa was awake, watching him from the bed. "I heard that," she said softly. "Good. Meant for you two. Come to bed, actual bed. Not the barn, not the loft. Here." It had been months since Thatch slept in this room. Even after the wedding, even after Rosa moved in, he'd kept to the barn, old habits, old ghosts. But looking at his wife looking at the family sleeping in this room, Thatch knew it was time to let those ghosts rest. He climbed into bed beside Rosa, and she nestled against him with a sigh of contentment. "We did good," she murmured, already half asleep. "Yeah, we did. I love you, Thatcher Crane. Love you too." Outside, the Wyoming night was alive with sound crickets and coyotes, wind through the grass, the creek running high with snowmelt. Inside, a family slept safe and warm and together. And Thatcher Crane, who'd spent so many years alone, finally closed his eyes and slept in his own bed in his own house, surrounded by the people who made it home. The ranch had grown. Thatch had added a proper bedroom for Pearl, built a larger barn, expanded the corral. They'd bought more land from a neighbor heading back east, doubling their holdings. The herd had grown from 20 horses to over 50. But the biggest change was the people. Pearl was 11 now, tall and sun-browned and confident. She could ride better than most men, read anything she could get her hands on, and had her mother's fierce determination combined with Thatch's quiet strength. Danny was for all energy and questions and laughter, and he followed Pearl everywhere, much to her alternating annoyance and delight. And Rosa had bloomed in the years since the trial. The haunted look was gone from her eyes, replaced by contentment and quiet joy. She ran the household with efficiency, kept the books for the ranch, and had started teaching children from neighboring ranches twice a week. On a warm September afternoon, they all made the trip to Cheyenne. Annual journey to visit Dr. Reed, stock up on supplies, see the lawyer who'd saved their family. But this year, they had an additional stop, the train station. Pearl stood on the platform fidgeting with the ribbon on her best dress. Rosa held Danny's hand, keeping him from running off. Thatch stood behind them, one hand on Pearl's shoulder. "Are you nervous?" Rosa asked her daughter. "A little." "You don't have to do this." "I know," Pearl took a deep breath. "But I want to." The train pulled in with a screech of brakes and a hiss of steam. Passengers began disembarking, farmers, merchants, families heading west, and then stepping down with the aid of a porter, Genevieve Hartford. She was older than in the courtroom 5 years ago, more fragile, but her eyes, when they found Pearl, filled with tears. Pearl stepped forward, leaving the safety of her parents. She walked right up to her grandmother and held out her hand. "Hello," Pearl said. "I'm Pearl May Crane. You can call me Pearl." Genevieve took the offered hand, shaking it formally. "Hello, Pearl. I'm your grandmother. You can call me whatever feels right. I wrote you letters. I cherished every one. Ma says you built a school. I did. The Pearl Hartford School for Girls in Philadelphia." Genevieve's voice wavered. "I hoped you might visit it someday. Maybe, when I'm older. Right now I like it here. I can see why." Genevieve looked past Pearl to where Thatch and Rosa waited. "Your family seems happy." "We are." Pearl turned, beckoning them forward. "Come meet my parents." Parents, plural, including the woman who'd tried to take her away. Genevieve approached slowly. She stopped in front of Rosa, and for a long moment, mother and daughter just looked at each other. "You were right," Genevieve said finally, "about everything. He was a good man. You made a good life. I was wrong to interfere." "You were trying to protect me," Rosa said, "in your own way." "A poor way, but your way." Rosa hesitated, then held out her hand. "Thank you for coming, for respecting Pearl's wishes, for the school." Genevieve took her daughter's hand. "Thank you for letting me try again." She turned to Thatch next. "Mr. Crane, I owe you an apology I can never adequately express." "Thatch," he said, "and you don't owe me anything. You owe Pearl, and you're paying that debt by being here, by respecting who she is and who she's chosen to be." Danny, who'd been watching all this with wide eyes, suddenly tugged free from Rosa's hand and ran to Genevieve. "Are you really, really old?" he asked. "Daniel Thomas Crane," Rosa gasped. But Genevieve laughed a real laugh, startled and delighted. "Yes, young man, I really, really am. Pa says old people know lots of stuff. Do you know stuff? Some stuff, yes. Can you teach me?" Genevieve looked at Thatch and Rosa, asking permission. Thatch nodded. "I'd like that very much," Genevieve said. They spent the afternoon showing Genevieve around Cheyenne, the school where Pearl attended classes, the church where Thatch and Rosa had married, the courthouse where they'd won their family. That evening, before Genevieve had to board the train back east, she pulled Thatch aside. "I thought I was losing everything when I lost that trial," she said quietly. "But I was really just losing control. And in losing control, I found something I'd never had before." "What's that?" "A relationship with my daughter, based on choice rather than obligation. A granddaughter who writes to me because she wants to, not because she has to." Genevieve smiled. "And the knowledge that I was wrong about you, Mr. Crane. You're not the opportunist I painted you as. You're simply a good man who loves his family." "I'm just a man who got lucky." "No, you're a man who made a choice, the right choice." She glanced over to where Pearl and Danny were playing while Rosa watched. "Thank you for that, for choosing them when I pushed them away." After Genevieve boarded the train after they'd waved goodbye and watched the engine pull away toward the east thatch, gathered his family together. "Ice cream," he suggested, "before we head home." Pearl and Danny cheered. Rosa laughed. They walked together through the streets of Cheyenne, father, mother, daughter, son. A family not bound by blood alone, but by choice, by struggle, by love freely given and freely returned. And as the sun set over the Wyoming plains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Thatcher Crane looked at the people beside him and knew with absolute certainty this was enough. This was everything. This was home.